Thank you and good morning. Welcome to day 2 of NeoCon 2025. So glad you all are here this morning for what I think is going to be a fantastic discussion. I'm David Usher, as was said, the National Board Chair of ASID. So I'm really pleased to be with you here today. ASID is celebrating a major milestone in our history, 50 years of activity representing every sector of design. And we're looking at this anniversary not just a celebration of our past, but how we can look forward to see how does design continue to impact lives across every sphere that we are in. And it's not just interior design, it's all the ways that designers think about problems and solve them and bring those to bear. So we're going to hear more about that from our speaker this morning. We've been proud to be out and about at South by Southwest in Austin, at New York Build, ICFF, at High Point and HD Expo, as well as, of course, here at NeoCon with an expanded offering this year. So glad to have ASID present here. One of the key insights that came out of our Trends Outlook report that comes out at the beginning of every year is an insight that there's a acceptance of skepticism. So we're going to get into that a bit more. So we're looking at what's the impact in the Trends report. We're looking at what's the impact of the kind of eroding trust in institutions. The way that we're thinking differently about calling for transparency, really leaning into values-driven decisions when it comes to design. So that challenges all of us to be more responsive and more responsible. So it's a great challenge for our time. It's got to be more than aesthetics. It's got to be more than beautiful. It has to work. It has to bring out the best in the people who inhabit the spaces we design. And there's a great power in that. So I'm really pleased to introduce Alice Rawsthorn. Alice is one of the most powerful voices in global design today. A celebrated critic and author of Design as an Attitude. She is the co-founder of the Design Emergency Initiative with Paola Antonelli, and she is a relentless advocate for the social, political, and ethical power of design. Her work reminds us that design is not just a profession, it is a tool for change, bringing about change at the small level, at the societal level, at the global level. And she challenges us to take an attitude that we can make those changes happen. In a time when we are being asked to do more, when design itself is being asked to do more, to bridge more divides, solve more problems, and reach outside of our own sphere, Alice's voice is more vital than ever. It is fitting that ASID is presenting this keynote because at our core, we believe that design must not only respond to the moment, we must lead it. So please join me in welcoming Alice Rawsthorn.
Well, thank you very much, David, and thank you to the NeoCon team for inviting me to join you all here in the great city of Chicago, one of my favorites, obviously. I'm delighted to be here and to have been asked to explore design's role in responding to changes in society. This would, of course, be a fascinating theme and a relevant one at any time, but it's especially so now, when we face extreme turbulence, volatility, and uncertainty in so many places, including, of course, the United States. Now, that's long been a defining theme of my work in my weekly design columns for the New York Times, in past books like Hello World, Where Design Meets Life, and for Design Emergency, the podcast and research platform that I run with my friend Paola Antonelli, who's Senior Curator of Design at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And it's central to my most recent book, Design as an Attitude. This is the Brazilian-Portuguese edition. It discusses how design can help us to address the complex challenges we all face, while, on an optimistic note, also making the most of promising new opportunities. But I'll begin by describing what I believe design to be, because the harsh truth is that most people don't see it as a means of changing society for the better. Instead, they tend to think of it in its stereotypical role as a stylistic, consumerist, or PR tool, as something that blings up overpriced hoodies, trainers, or uncomfortable chairs. Not that there are any of those in NeoCon, of course. Now, design Design is guilty on all these counts and doubtless will continue to be, but there's much, much, much more to it. It's a complex and elusive phenomenon that's adopted very different meanings at different times and in different contexts, and that's left it prone to muddles, misunderstandings, and cliches. Yet in all its many guises, I believe that design has always had one elemental role, and it's as this. It's an agent of change that can interpret changes of any type, social, political, economic, scientific, technological, cultural, environmental, whatever, to ensure that they will affect us positively rather than negatively. And design has done this for centuries, long before a word was invented to describe it, because whenever human beings have tried to adapt to changes in their lives, whether by fabricating new objects or structures, or moderating their own behavior or other people's, they've engaged with design, but they've generally done so intuitively and unknowingly. Prehistoric communities, for example, acted as designers on the necessity as the mother of invention principle by sharpening sticks, stones, and animal bones to use as weapons and tools, and by molding clay into vessels that they could eat or drink from. And many subsequent design feats have been equally instinctive. Take this one, the raised fist. It's been recognized as a symbol of strength and unity in the face of adversity for over 3,000 years since ancient Assyria. And the same gesture has been used as a symbol of a succession of political activists, from campaigners for workers' rights and women's suffrage in the early 1900s, to Russian revolutionaries, the Black Power, gay rights and feminist movements in the 1960s and 1970s, and more recently by Black Lives Matter activists like these. And another, only less slightly ancient symbol is this one, the white flag, which was officially acknowledged as a symbol of surrender at the end of conflict and the beginning of peace in the late 19th century, but had already been used for exactly that purpose for over 2,000 years. Nor has design ever lost its necessity as the mother of invention role as a useful tool for resourceful people in challenging circumstances. And a tragic but brilliant illustration of this is the Ukrainian design response to Vladimir Putin's odious war. The speed with which Ukraine's designers, professional or otherwise, have rallied to support their country after Russia's invasion has been incredibly impressive, not least because it's rooted in their determination to defend and sustain the new independent society that they've created since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Within days of the Russian invasion, Ukrainian fashion designers had switched to making military uniforms and sleeping bags. The Russians invaded literally 3 days after Kyiv Design Week, and they pivoted immediately. Architects have converted schools and conference centers into temporary accommodation for the millions of Ukrainians who've been forced to leave their homes. Community volunteers have designed elaborate new ways of protecting beloved historic monuments, like this one in Odessa. And Ukrainian tech designers have rewritten the rules of modern warfare by developing new weapons and surveillance systems, as we all now know, often by hacking cheap consumer drones into deadlier weapons and then constantly redesigning them to make them deadlier still. And in the latest issue of The Economist, it describes Ukraine's attack last week on the top-grade Russian military helicopters hundreds of kilometers into Russians' turf as being one of the greatest attack raids in military history. The Ukrainian tech designers have also designed formidable apps to protect their fellow citizens from danger. So an example is this one. It's Kitsoft's Kyiv digital app, which sends alarms whenever Russian missile strikes are detected, so citizens can head for their nearest shelter. It also tells them whether that shelter has Wi-Fi, and if not, where the nearest Wi-Fi shelter could be, as well as when it's safe to leave, and it does exactly the same for pharmacies, food stores, and gas stations. I was lucky enough to go to Ukraine, to Kyiv last summer, so I saw all of this for myself, and it was deeply moving to meet so many extraordinarily resourceful and courageous designers, and also heartbreaking, because however impressive and sorely needed their work was, everyone's lost a loved one, and everybody has grief and trauma to carry for years to come. Now, equally ingenious is the conversion of 70 1980s railway carriages into mobile ambulances, hospital wards, and intensive care units by the design engineers at Ukrainian Railways, working with a design team assembled by the non-profit Kolo Foundation. These carriages have already transferred over 60,000 wounded Ukrainian soldiers out of battle zones to specialist hospitals in safer parts of Ukraine. They're attached to standard trains to avoid detection by the Russians, who would undoubtedly attack if they knew they were for military use. And the NGO Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, has also designed and now runs a similar service for wounded civilians. And this is one of its mobile emergency treatment centres, and the construction has also begun of a network of underground hospitals near the front line. But my favourite example of Ukrainian design ingenuity is a guerrilla campaign conducted by graphic designers throughout the country to vandalise road signs in order to confuse Russian troops as they tried to move around Ukraine. So on most of the road signs, they have literally erased the original place names, so the Russians won't know where they are or where they're heading for. But in this particular example, they replaced every single place name with the name of one city, the Dutch city, Den Haag, which is, of course, the home of the International Criminal Court and the European Court of Human Rights, where, if justice prevails, Putin and his cronies should end up at the end of this egregious conflict. Yet, most people don't think about design like this. They think of it as it was in the industrial age, when it was applied knowingly and systematically to manufacture huge quantities of identical goods of consistent quality at affordable prices. And the practice of design was formalized during this period with the introduction of training programs, specialist schools, and clearly defined methodologies. Design became professionalized by industrialization, and it achieved a huge amount by doing so. But it was also restricted to a commercial role, generally one that was executed under instruction from someone else. And I believe this was the beginning of its diminution and its stereotyping as a promotional tool, something concerned with surface appearance rather than substance. But there were always exceptions to this, and here is one truly great American designer, the maverick designer, engineer, activist, and self-styled astronaut of spaceship Earth, Richard Buckminster Fuller. He campaigned against the environmental damage caused by industrialization as early as the 1920s, but was routinely ignored and dismissed as a crank. And another pioneer was the great early 20th century designer, artist and visual theorist, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. Here he is in the industrial boiler suit, the factory worker's boiler suit he would wear every day when he was teaching at the Bauhaus in Germany in the 1920s. Now, when he was there, he radicalized the curriculum and the mission of the Bauhaus by allying it with modernism and enabling women to study whatever they wished, including subjects, over 90% of them, that were once reserved solely for men. And after he fled Nazi Germany, he was Jewish, so had to leave to live here in Chicago. Moholy-Nagy set up a succession of experimental design schools. This was in the 1930s, and he was equally radical. He welcomed African-American students and teachers to them, a very courageous act at a time when the education system was largely segregated. And this is the new Bauhaus, which opened in 1937, initially in Marshall Field's empty mansion on South Prairie Avenue. And here, and wherever else he was, Moholy-Nagy was unfailingly optimistic, generous, subversive, curious, and committed to experimentation, from pioneering the then new media of film and photography to investigating their impact on visual culture. But critically, he also reinvented the concept of design by liberating it from the constraints of its professional role in the industrial age by redefining it as an improvisational medium rooted in instinct, ingenuity, resourcefulness, and open to everyone. And he discussed his theories around this in his 1947 book, written here in Chicago, Vision in Motion. Now, in it, he summed up his eclectic and empowering vision of design as what he called a generally valid attitude of resourcefulness and inventiveness in the title of chapter 2 of the book, with the words, "Designing is not a profession but an attitude." And inspiring though Moulinage's work was, and that of fellow radicals like Bucky Fuller, their vision of design still remained on the margins of design culture for most of the 20th century. But that has changed and is changing dramatically as design has experienced a metamorphosis into the fluid, expansive, open-ended medium that he described in Vision in Motion. Now, I chose the phrase design as an attitude as the title of my book, partly as a tribute to Moulinage, because he's one of my design heroes, many design heroines too, of course, but in the spirit of gender equality, heroes too. And because I believe that his concept of design as an attitudinal discipline steeped in experimentation is a defining force in design today, when a new generation of designers, professional and otherwise, are seizing their chance to work independently to pursue their own social, political, and environmental goals. And the chief catalyst, apart from the determination and ingenuity of the individuals involved, are digital tools that have transformed the practice and possibilities of design, creating a plethora of new opportunities for designers now and in the future. Now, most of these tools are basic and inexpensive, they're affordable, they're ubiquitous, they may seem rather boring, but when they're applied imaginatively, they've enabled designers to operate independently and to define their own ways of working, rather than working under instruction from someone else. So one leap forward was the availability of crowdfunding platforms that have helped designers to raise large sums of money to fund their work. Hundreds of millions of dollars in the case of the ocean cleanup, the Dutch social enterprise which is committed to clearing the massive toxic trash that's poisoning our oceans and rivers. Thanks to the generous crowdfunding, and it set the original world record for non-profit crowdfunding, it has already removed over 20 million kilograms of trash from the oceans and rivers. But designers can also manage huge quantities of complex data on affordable computers, something that would have been impossible for them before. They can use social media to raise awareness of their work, flush out collaborators, suppliers and fabricators, clinch funding, or generate more media coverage. And they can deploy new digital tools like open source intelligence, or OSINT, as it's known for short, which includes smartphone photos, video clips, tracking apps like Find My and CCTV footage to develop new roles for designers as campaigners for restorative justice, as forensic architecture has done by investigating human rights abuses and climate crimes. Individually, each of these changes would have had a positive impact on design, as they have on so many other sectors, but collectively, they've proved transformational. And that's just as well, because we urgently need design's power as an agent of change at this extraordinarily turbulent time when we face challenges on so many fronts. Now, it's a terrifying situation, and it was summed up brilliantly by this rather dodgily designed, in aesthetic terms, I have to admit, sign. It was my favourite banner at a Women's March on London, and here are just a few of the challenges that could have been on that sign. One is, of course, the deepening refugee crisis, as according to the UNHCR, at least 123 million people are currently displaced worldwide, having been forced to flee their homes, and the global refugee population has trebled in size in the last decade. There's also the growing imbalance of wealth between rich and poor, old and young, the curse of McJobs and the housing and homelessness crises. There is, of course, the human tragedy and turmoil caused by the horrific conflicts in Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, Ethiopia, the DCR, Myanmar, and the plethora of other wars. The growing distrust of democracy and the political establishment, the rise of intolerance, prejudice, bigotry, and the crisis of social justice, and ever more terrifying terrorist attacks, cybercrimes, and killing sprees. And, of course, the escalating climate emergency and its dire political, economic, and ecological consequences, which is affecting everywhere all over the world. But in Africa, which is really on the precipice of climate change, many countries now face the worst famines in their history. Then, of course, there's the threat of future pandemics and of how accelerating advances in technology will reshape society. This is a time of intense uncertainty, but also considerable possibilities. And after a decade in which technologies that once would have seemed like sci-fi props have become part of daily life, including the AI-powered biometric surveillance systems that are now ubiquitous in public spaces, for example, we urgently need design to help us to identify constructive uses for generative AI, neuromorphic and quantum computing, informatics, and all the other advances that we know for sure will be critical parts of our daily life in the future. And of course, design's role is also to help us avoid their dangers. Now, identifying useful applications for inscrutable technologies was one of design's core roles in the industrial age, but it has taken on a new urgency given the power of the next wave of advances and their potential to wreak damage, as the Australian technologist and author Kate Crawford, who also designed this extraordinary graphic image, this data visualization, the author of the excellent book Atlas of AI, described in 2 brilliant design emergency interviews with Paola. And if you only read one book on AI, I know there are now trillions to choose from, I would read Kate's. It's absolutely fantastic. Now, design isn't a panacea for any of these serious problems, but it can help us to address them intelligently and responsibly. And attitudinal designers are already grappling with these challenges, and many, many more, proving exactly what design can do to help us. There are lots of examples in Design as an Attitude, and also in the interviews Paola and I have conducted for Design Emergency, which, having started as an Instagram Live research platform in the pandemic, has since become a podcast, a YouTube channel, and a book, Design Emergency, Building a Better Future. To add context, I'll describe just a couple of examples of inspiring attitudinal design projects that are already changing people's lives radically for the future. Now, the first is a truly epic design endeavor, and it's this, the Great Green Wall of Africa. It's an example of the strategic use of design to realize an exceptionally ambitious project in 21 countries in one of the hottest, driest, poorest, and most fragile parts of the world by planting and cultivating a 5,000-mile strip of vegetation from Senegal on Africa's west coast to Djibouti on the east coast. And this is part of the Great Green Wall in Senegal. It's also an example of design's ability to address incredibly complex intersectional challenges in which a problem of one type, in this case drought, not only causes other ecological threats, deforestation, desertification, and soil erosion, for example, but also profound socioeconomic problems like famine, poverty, mass migration, terrorism, and war. Like many of the new genre of design endeavors, it's a long-running and highly contentious project. It's African-led, as it should be, by the African Union, and supported financially by the World Bank, the United Nations, and a number of national governments. It was launched in 2007, so quite a long time ago, and each country has been free to restore their land as they wish. Progress has been very erratic, so Senegal, here it is again, has been by far the most successful. It's fared very well with tree planting, as did Burkina Faso and Niger by reviving ancient agricultural and irrigation techniques, but their work has been stalled as conflicts have exploded in those countries, as has that of another early success, Ethiopia, when civil war erupted there. 2 years ago, only 20% of the project was completed, but a consortium of donors led by the World Bank and the French government then announced $19 billion of funding for the Great Green Wall, which gives it a fighting chance of achieving completion and meeting its goal of creating 10 million new green jobs by 2030. Now, equally ambitious in their determination to repair the damage caused by the climate crisis are the Italian designers Andrea Tremacchi and Simone Farasin of Forma Fantasma in Milan. Since they founded Forma Fantasma immediately after graduating 15 years ago, Andrea and Simone have emerged as being among the most influential product and furniture designers of their generation. They have the extraordinary gift of developing formally elegant, subtly idiosyncratic objects for clients including Artek, Cassina, Floss, and Prada that also explore important, often controversial, social, political, and ecological issues. And here they are in their studio in Milan. Now, they have also conducted an ambitious series of investigative research projects. This is in parallel with their design practice, by analysing problematic aspects of design that have a profound impact on society, but are seldom discussed or even acknowledged. And among them are ore streams, which expose the gigantic, intensely secretive, often criminalistic, global trade in digital waste, to identify ways of making the waste disposal and recycling process more efficient. And two other projects, including this one, Ultra Terra, and Cambio, which explored the history and current dynamics of two equally contentious global industries, the wool and timber trades, and their historic links to colonialism. And by doing so, Forma Fantasma has imbued the contemporary design scene with a sorely needed intellectual rigor, political context, and a new sense of purpose. Then there is the redoubtable Yasmin Lari. Here she is, second from left on the screen. She is the veteran Pakistani architect, she's 84, who after a successful career in conventional architecture now describes herself as the architect for the poorest of the poor, practicing what she calls humanistic humanitarian design. In autumn 2022, after over 33 million Pakistanis were displaced from their homes by the worst monsoon floods in their country's history, and it's had many horrific floods before, Yasmin began a mission to build 1 million new flood-resilient households by the end of last year. So that was just 2 years after the tragic flooding. This was a tough challenge even for her, the first woman ever to register to practice architecture in Pakistan, who established herself as one of its leading architects in the 1980s. But she then decided to focus first on conserving the country's neglected architectural heritage, and then on tackling its profound social and ecological problems, hence her vow to build the 1 million new homes by the end of 2024, which would comply with her mantra of 4 zeros: zero carbon, zero waste, zero donors equals zero poverty. Now, by the beginning of last year, over 333,000 new homes had been built, which frankly was an incredible achievement, though well below Yasmin's target. And greatly as I admire her, I presume that she probably wouldn't hit the 1 million mark. But by the end of last year, the remarkable Yasmin Lari and her collaborators had completed the construction of 1,070,000 new households like these in flood zones across Pakistan. But just as Moulinage urged designers to engage with other disciplines by forging collaborations with specialists from those fields, he envisaged the reverse happening, and for those people to start experimenting with design, and that too has happened. Take the British social scientist Hilary Cottam, who became convinced of design's usefulness in addressing complex social and economic issues when she was running water projects for the World Bank in Africa. And she realized that the quality of their design was absolutely critical in determining their success or failure. Back in the UK, Hilary founded a social enterprise and non-profit Participal as an experimental sort of laboratorial project to reinvent public services by designing new solutions for major social problems like aging, homelessness, isolation, and unemployment. Traditionally, a designer's role in tackling issues like this would have been limited to producing websites or brochures explaining what social scientists, politicians, economists, and other experts had already decided to do. But Hilary embeds designers in the decision-making process by assembling cross-disciplinary teams of relevant specialists that are led by designers, use design language, and adhere to the design process. And she does this because she believes that it will yield a better outcome, a more imaginative one, a more surprising one, and critically, a more efficient one. Now, after a decade of experiments, Participal closed, and Hilary described its excellent work in her book, Radical Help, which again, I would urge you to read it. But its projects continue to be run by their local communities, which is what Hilary and her colleagues wanted in the first place, and its work continues to influence social design groups all over the planet. And Hilary's new focus is on how to redesign all aspects of work to make it fit for purpose. She traveled across the UK and here in the US to find out what workers, their employers, value about their working lives and what needs to change. And last month, she published a book based on her findings, The Work We Need, which, yes, I have read it, and I interviewed Hilary about it for Design Emergency, so do listen to the episode, but more importantly, read the book because it's terrific. Now, another equally ingenious example of the use of strategic design by design ingenues is Sehat Kahani. It's a telemedicine service that was designed by two Pakistani doctors who'd met at medical school, Sarah Saeed Karam, who's on the left of the slide, and Ifat Safar Agar. And their aim was to provide healthcare throughout Pakistan, a nation of 200 million people, less than half of whom have regular access to healthcare, but especially to women who, because they tend to want to be treated by women doctors, have even fewer health choices than men. So Sarah and Ifat began by opening small teleclinics like this one in poorly resourced rural areas of Pakistan, where patients could consult qualified women doctors like them who'd stopped working after marriage on live video links from their homes. And the patients were accompanied by local nurses who then liaised with the doctor brides, as they're called, on their treatment. And the e-clinics expanded rapidly throughout Pakistan, and a couple of months before COVID-19 struck, Sehat Kahani also launched an app. Now, it was a very timely introduction because during COVID, all the clinics had to close. But Sehat Kahani's service expanded dramatically thanks to the app, because of course most other health clinics had to close too. It won government support for its work. It's now delivered over 4 million consultations to 1.6 million users and runs 65 local e-clinics throughout the country. And it is hailed as a role model for telemedicine worldwide. So it's a very interesting example of a really imaginative and effective project in the so-called global south, inspiring their peers here in the global north. And last but by no means least is the work of DemocracyNext. This is a Dutch-based non-profit research and action institute founded 3 years ago by the Polish-Canadian economist Claudia Schwelitz, with a mission to redesign a crucial aspect of society, democracy, at a time when it's increasingly under threat. Now, I have to declare a conflict of interest here, so I am on the International Advisory Board of DemocracyNext and obviously joined it because I believe passionately in their work and the need for it. But I have so enjoyed seeing Claudia and her colleagues developing the project in such extraordinary ways. They experiment with different ways of reinventing elections, public consultations, and other aspects of our democratic systems that most people feel a bit bored by or alienated by. And their aim is to restore public confidence in them by making them seem fairer and indeed being fairer, more accessible and effective. They've also designed new forms of citizens' assemblies, like those that debated assisted dying being legalized in France and the legalization of abortion and same-sex marriage in Ireland, to make them more inclusive and empowering. And DemocracyNext has also applied its design methodologies to helping public institutions, including museums and local councils, to consult their communities to find out what citizens really want and need from them, including exhibitions on the design of democracies that they staged in Austria and Germany. Now, among its current projects is a collaboration with researchers at MIT here in the US to identify how AI can be used to scale up public engagement with politics by involving more people in each citizens' assembly, for example, and other deliberative processes, and in increasing their frequency so more of us will have the chance to deepen our understanding of the value of democracies and to rebuild our trust in them. Now, all these designers, professional or not, are making significant contributions to strengthening and revitalizing our societies at this precarious time. And there are many other equally admirable examples in Designers and Attitude, in the podcasts for Design Emergency. So very quickly, just a few of them are: this is the amazing Irish activist Sinead Burke, who sees design as a crucial tool in her mission to make society safer and more accessible for the 15% of the global population. That's 1 billion people who, like her, she's a little person, live with a form of disability. Then there's the British architect Peter Barber, who has devoted his entire career, nearly 40 years, to designing new forms of decent, affordable social housing, like these halfway houses in London for people who've been homeless for many years, who are taking steps towards preparing to live in permanent homes again. Then there's the Australian ecologist Julia Watson, who spent over 20 years researching indigenous communities in remote parts of the world who use ancient wisdom and design methodologies that can be sensitively applied in our own societies. The great Piet Oudolf, the Dutch plantsman and landscape architect, who has transformed the role of plants, parks and gardens in our cities by studying their response to different soils and climates and reviving ancient spaces. And yesterday I had the pleasure of seeing a Chicago version of the High Line out in one of the western suburbs with people running, jogging, sitting on benches, taking kids around in strollers. It was just joyous. Now, design has not traditionally been seen as a solution to major disasters and emergencies, such as devastating droughts, mass migration, dysfunctional social systems, healthcare shortages, or the growing distrust of democracy. Nor were independent designers expected to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to mount epic ecological adventures like the ocean cleanup, or doctors like Sarah and Ifat at Sehat Kahani to recognize that design could be useful in their work. Even now, more people still see it as a styling tool or as a reason why so much plastic trash is poisoning our oceans, rather than as a means of clearing it away. And if Moulinage's ambitious and eclectic vision of design is to be realized, those cliches have got to be squashed. And the only way to do that is for design to prove its worth in its new terrain, because if it doesn't, why on earth should politicians, bureaucrats, and NGOs consider it to be capable of addressing such complex problems? I believe that design is one of our most powerful tools to help us to tackle them, but only if it's deployed intelligently and sensitively with extreme care and precision, while working in close collaboration with specialists from other disciplines. Only that way can it win the public confidence and political support it needs to be empowered. And if it doesn't prove those things, it won't, not least because as our designers become more ambitious, the consequences of failure escalate. Just as every sloppily designed project that flops risks becoming a major setback, every thoughtfully planned and executed attitudinal design project could represent significant progress. So what do these changes in design and society mean for NeoCon's audience and in the context of NeoCon? Now, the current pace of social, economic, political, and cultural change is so frenzied that only a fool would risk firm predictions, but it is possible to make a number of reasonably confident, and you'll be happy to hear largely optimistic, observations. Now, one is that the demand for an interest in interior design seems set to continue to expand among consumers and commercial clients alike, as people's taste becomes more sophisticated, not least because we're so exposed to interiors, both on legacy media, through shelter magazines and TV shows like The White Lotus. This is, of course, one of the sets from the recent season. Friends and Neighbors, The Morning Show, and just about anything on Netflix that stars Nicole Kidman. We also ogle property porn on Instagram, TikTok, and other social media streams for insanely lengthy periods of time. So as a result, more people are likely to be willing to spend more on interiors and then to spend again on them sooner in pursuit of something that feels unique, personal, innovative in terms of form and function, and crucially, that's also ecologically sustainable. Because even if some of the people in this room are not that convinced that climate change is a serious threat, lots of other people are and are changing their purchasing decisions accordingly. This doesn't just apply to our homes, but our workplaces, hotels, restaurants, movie theaters, deluxe care home, and anywhere else that we spend our time. Another catalyst for growth is the sensitive subject of home working, and there was a debate on that at NeoCon yesterday, which has, of course, proved hugely popular, largely among white-collar office staff who enjoy the benefits of flexible working hours, freedom from office politics and stressful commutes, and spending more time with their families and so on, but less so with employers who worry about staff going rogue when they're at home and the adverse impact on team spirit, training new recruits and team building, all all legitimate concerns. So far, employers have struggled to persuade their staff to return to their workplaces, but there is a growing recognition that an effective way of luring them back and of persuading the smartest, the best and the brightest new recruits to join them is to invest more in the design of those workplaces. An example is the US bank Citigroup, which is currently investing nearly $1.5 billion on renovating its City Tower headquarters in London. Not all of the 1.5 billion will be spent on interior design, but a large chunk of it will. And my friend Ilse Crawford, the great British interior designer, always argues that because in timing terms, interiors come last in any major capital project, that's where the cuts tend to be made. Everyone else continues overspending, knowing that budget can be cut. And her other argument is that given that most of us spend the majority of our time indoors, it's insane that interiors aren't foregrounded. But I think that may happen increasingly in the future. And let's hope that the new office interiors are as chic as my favorite office design of all time. This is the postmodernist lair of the late, great New York fashion designer Willi Smith in his studio, designed by him with James Wine and Sight. Now, equally encouraging for interior design is the forecast growth in global demand for it, probably not due to the sudden emergence of a game-changing major new market like China's turbocharged expansion in the early 2000s, but because of the sustained growth. This is obviously assuming World Wars III, IV, V, and VI don't happen, in expanding economies like India, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam in Asia, as well as Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and other countries on the African continent. And Africa is particularly interesting. It's already the youngest continent on our planet, where the average age is half that of the United States and Europe, with the fastest growing rate of urbanization. So it's likely to become increasingly important as an economic force in the future, not least as despite its tragic history, it has an incredibly rich cultural heritage. It's also equally likely to influence future directions of design through the new generation of talented young designers who are already emerging and are committed to defining new design languages reflecting their cultures in different parts of the continent. Just as in the post-war era, Dieter Rams did in Germany, Sori Yanagi in Japan, Achille Castiglioni in Italy, Arne Jacobsen in Denmark, and of course the Eames here in the United States. Now, an example of these gifted young African designers is the Nigerian product and furniture designer Nefemi Marcus Bello, who works from Lagos, always developing objects that are steeped in the city's culture, mostly inspired by vernacular products in daily use in Nigeria and its neighbors, but also historic West Indian artifacts like 19th century Igbo sculpture. Now, Nefemi collaborates with local makers and artisans on fabricating his work, which has already won international awards and is now in the collections of the Art Institute here in Chicago, LACMA in LA, MoMA in New York, and where his work is currently on display in the Pirouette exhibition. The same applies to his Latin American counterparts, like the Mexican designer Fernando Lapos. He has studied the design and making cultures and materials of indigenous rural communities throughout Mexico, working with local artisans to identify ways of transforming natural materials such as sisal, loofah, corn leaves, and husks into furniture. Thanks to Fernando, Nefemi, and other gifted young designers working outside the so-called global north, we can expect design, interior design, and every other manifestation of it to become increasingly eclectic, idiosyncratic, and cosmopolitan in its influences in the near future, which is incredibly exciting. And another important part of that process will be the design response to the growing desire among consumers for interiors and their contents to have rich narratives. This is something that smart designers have explored for years, often instinctively. Fernando and Nefemi are among them, as are former Phantasma and the British interior designer Rose Uniacke, whose narratives are not only relayed through conventional visual and tactile cues and subtle contrasts of light, color, shade, and scale, but by what architects call the atmosphere of a space. created through humidity and sound. Now, this is the beautiful winter garden, which is one of the first rooms you encounter when you enter Rose's wonderful home in London, in what was originally the house and studio of an admittedly not particularly talented 19th century artist, James Ranney Swinton, but he had great taste in building houses. Now, it's an absolute joy to go into this room, as I'm sure you can imagine. There's the scent and other sensations from the orchids, the bare bricks, the spindly Diego Giacometti chairs. But Rose has heightened the experience by adding the sound of water trickling through a 19th century marble fountain. You can see it at the back of the space. And because it moistens the air very gently, it immediately signals that you're entering somewhere special and unusual that you should look at very carefully. So it's thoroughly intriguing. And an area of interior design that is becoming more and more important and more visible, and that's particularly rich in narrative, is of course textiles, which have benefited from a surge of interest in recent years, after having been ignored or neglected, often due to being dismissed as women's work. Now that's changed as new books on textiles have been published and major museums have mounted exhibitions on them and their history, notably Weaving Abstraction at the Met in New York last year and Woven Histories, which is now on at MoMA New York, both featuring the work of this wonderful designer, the great Annie Albers, seen here working on her loom at Yale. Now, apart from celebrating the skills and knowledge involved in designing and making the textiles exhibited in these shows, they tell incredible stories that were forgotten for decades on gifted and courageous early 20th century textile designers like Annie Albers in the top left, Otti Berger and Gunther Stilzel, all of whom enrolled at the Bauhaus in the 1920s, determined to study different subjects, only to be forced to join the all-female weaving workshop, and then pioneered the design of modernist textiles. And equally intriguing are the stories of the amazing women who followed them, like Althea McNish and Marianne Straub in the post-war era, and more recently Helle Jongerius, and of community initiatives like those of the Geesben quilt makers in Alabama and Ruth Clement Bond's TVA quilters, whose husbands were building the Wheeler Dam. Now, as for how attitudinal design fits into this scenario, it stands to reason that if interiors or any other area of design is to thrive, it will need the best and the brightest designers to provide the energy, ideas, skills, and vision required to do so. It's also evident that you're likelier to get them if design becomes more open, eclectic, and attractive and appealing as a profession, giving individual designers the widest possible choices of how to engage with it and the freedom to focus on their own chosen causes, and if they wish to develop their own ways of working and be positive forces in society. So thank you very much for listening and enjoy NeoCon. Thank you.
Alice, thank you so much. What an inspiring talk, and I'm full of so many questions and ideas, and I'm sure there are many from the audience. If you can engage in questions, submit your questions through the Mentimeter by scanning the QR code. Those are going to be kind of filtered by the staff in the back. But I wanted to start with a question on some of these really ambitious social projects are engaging people who might not engage in design. So how might designers approach that? We know that defining the problem is a key component, and learning that language of those stakeholders is really critical. What kind of advice could you give, or observations that you've had that have been successful in that?
Well, I think the designers who tend to be successful in this, like Forma Phantasma would be a good example. Mm-hmm. They have a conventional commercial practice. Nothing they produce is conventional, but it's extraordinary. And they would be revered and admired as exciting and interesting designers if they only did that. But they naturally were drawn towards these sort of troubling, complex, underlying issues in design and economics and industrialization in general that have never really been explored, certainly not in a design context. And so in their first investigative design research exercise or streams into the global digital recycling trade. They interviewed politicians, Interpol agents, recyclers, manufacturers, other designers, NGOs whose missions were affected by these activities. And so these were people who had never considered design as having a role to play. In fact, they interviewed the CEO of the biggest recycling business in Europe, who claimed he'd never met a designer. Now, so many of their practices just needed minor tweaks. These were things that, as designers, Andrea and Simone could identify, as could the collaborators they brought in. So I think the key thing in the projects that work, that really are for the general good, come from passion and focus from the designers themselves, and also the ability to engage others, which is something that designers are really good at doing. That's why Hilary Cottam, the social scientist, works with designers. She thinks that without realizing it, designers have communication skills, observation skills that can be applied productively in many, many other contexts.
And to ask the questions that are not being asked.
Exactly.
Right? With a look to the future. One of the questions from the audience, what are you most proud of in your career, and what trend are you most excited for in the future?
Ooh, well, not that I'm religious, but I come from a Methodist family, so pride is out of the question. And I'm one of these people, I always look forward, rather than, I try and learn from my mistakes, of course, but rather than looking back. So that's my answer to the first part. I mean, I'm generally excited about the future, bleak though it is in many parts, and I'm an inherent optimist, as you may have gathered from the talk, and that's one of the reasons I'm drawn to design, because it is an optimistic culture. It may have many barriers to surmount and obstacles to avoid, but inherently, I don't believe a single designer wakes up in the morning thinking, I'm going to design something deeply mediocre today. I think everyone really wants to push things forward, and that's why I find it such a thrilling and engaging discipline to engage with, and also it's constantly changing, and I really like that because it sets me new challenges.
Right, new challenges, new things to learn all the time. So for someone who isn't a designer themselves, how might they use design as an attitude in their daily lives?
Okay, well, I may be pushing the use of the word design a bit far with this, but I think everything we do is designed. If you're planning a journey, you design it, perhaps to a slightly lesser degree. Now we have digital mapping. If you ice a birthday cake, you're designing that too. But I think more importantly, we unknowingly and instinctively use our natural design schools when we're planning anything. It might be a vacation. It could be something that's more obviously design related, like changes to the home. So I do honestly believe, perhaps naively, that all our activities are designed. The critical thing is we need to do it better and better.
Absolutely. What would you say to new designers entering the scene wanting to make an impact on the world?
I would say that you're lucky because there's never been a better time to do it. I mean, I've been writing about design. I was a general journalist initially, so I worked for the Financial Times for 20 years. So I wrote about politics, economics, business affairs. I was a foreign correspondent in Paris, but I decided I wanted to focus on one subject I was really passionate about, and I chose design, and I'm so happy that I did. And I was always drawn to the social, political, and environmental aspects of design and how it affects causes I passionately believe in. But for years, the problem was there weren't that many genuine role models, and there were a lot of very ambitious projects that have failed. I mean, I don't know whether anyone here remembers One Laptop Per Child, which was a thoroughly worthwhile project that aimed to give specially designed, Yves Behar designed them very smartly and cutely, laptops to kids mostly on the African continent, but there was no repair strategy, there was no facilities available for recycling, and so basically many a village was littered with broken, discarded laptops. And projects like that really applied sort of Western values to other places were doomed to fail, and there were an awful lot of them for a very long time. But now we have incredible examples of these really dynamic social and ecological design projects that are making a huge difference in our lives, whether they were initiated by designers or by doctors like Ifat and Sarah from Sehat Kahani. So that will make charitable trusts and foundations more confident about investing in your work. It makes corporate concerns more engaged with design, readier to listen to the possibility of using designers' specialist skills to help them tackle major challenges, ecological sustainability being a key one. So it's a great time to really make your mark on the world through design.
So I think we have maybe time for one or two more questions. How can intelligence and sensitivity in design be emphasized in design education, specifically industrial design, for some of the product designers who might be in the room, or people
who are
wondering about
with their
looking
design
at,
education? I mean, again, the good news is that it's also been incredible to watch the speed with which really smart design schools have embraced these challenges and have changed their curricula, the sort of skill sets of their staff, the facilities they offer to enable students to work with them during their design education. So I think that process has already started, and the longer it continues, the sort of more and more schools will buy into it. So for example, furniture design courses, which used to be very popular, certainly in Europe, I don't know about North America, applications have tumbled dramatically, and so a lot of those courses have closed, but humanitarian design courses have opened, social design courses have opened, and so on. So I think education's much more user-friendly now in this regard.
And a broader definition of what design is.
Yes.
Right, right. What is the future responsibility for formal design education compared to vernacular design practices?
I don't think they really need to be compared. I mean, both are incredibly important. I mean, certainly there's an explosion of interest and activity in vernacular design practices at the moment. So people like Julia Watson, the Australian researcher I talked about, Nefemi Marcus Bello in Nigeria, Fernando Lapos in Mexico. And there's increasing interest in sort of applying that ancient indigenous wisdom on a massive scale to major real world challenges. But I hope that I haven't come across as suggesting that commercial design, as we've known it for decades, will collapse completely. It won't. It will change, that sensibly should, as any culture sensibly should, to reflect broader changes in society, and it will have new priorities. I think it's just that design is expanding to create lots of other new ways of working with it. And also, the notion of formal design education will continue, but I think we'll have a much more eclectic vision of what form, or rather what beauty means in design and what attractiveness means in design, taking in texture, scent, atmospherics, and so on.
And engagement with culture, right? To do things that are culturally sensitive, culturally appropriate, and learning from that, building on that.
Yes, absolutely.
The examples you gave are a great illustration of how those can be successful.
Which means everyone else takes design more seriously, which is good.
Right. How are we doing on time? Do we have time for one more? I think we have about 3 minutes, so we can take another one or two. With AI becoming a prominent tool in almost every workplace, are you utilizing it in your recent work, and how so?
Well, we all use AI, whether or not we know we are. Because of the kind of work I do, which is in many ways very personal, it's research and then communicating my conclusions about that research. I may be being completely recidivist in saying this, but I think that's so idiosyncratic. I think it's been a long time before I voluntarily choose to depend on an AI tool to do that. But in terms of, very basic research, searches for information, digital mapping and so on, fantastic.
Right.
So I mean, AI can contribute so much to our lives. It really can make them easier, more efficient, less wasteful. It is a question of prioritizing that and avoiding the very obvious problems that it can also cause.
Right, and I think I've heard a lot of people talking about this in this way of thinking it more as augmented intelligence, augmenting what we can do, helping us to go further with our own sensibilities and skills, finding nuance where only humans can. So, what advice would you give young designers who haven't yet found their passion?
Ooh, well, if the passion is for a specific aspect of design, I would just say immerse yourself in design. Read as much about it as you can, visit as many exhibitions, workplaces as you can, share ideas with your friends. And passion isn't something you can manufacture. It sort of strikes you or it doesn't. And so probably it is just a question of remaining confident that you will become genuinely passionate about something. But if you're not feeling passionate about design, then it's up to you to decide whether it is a field you wish to continue to pursue, or whether actually, if you feel instinctively you'd be more passionate about something else, you're better off pursuing that. I mean, design is tough, as you know better than me, and I think passion is absolutely central to the work of every great designer.
And I think you've illustrated,
you can't fake it.
Exactly, and I think you've illustrated today so clearly that the design skills, the design thinking that designers have, even if they're not finding their passion for a particular project type, there are ways to apply that in really meaningful ways all throughout society. So that's fantastic. We have about 30 seconds left. So you've spoken about the importance of evaluating design and even its negative aspects. We talked about some of the unintended consequences of things. What do you think is the biggest misconception about design that you have encountered in your work?
Oh, well, tragically, there are lots of contenders for that answer. I mean, I think the major all-consuming misconception is that design is just a styling tool. An
aesthetic.
And I think it's very easy if you have friends, as I'm lucky enough to do, who share your passion in design, absolutely convinced that it can be an important tool to change our lives to the better, and that there's ample evidence to support that and persuade people to back it. And so that, I think, is the key thing.
Well, very good. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you, David, and thank you to all of you.
Applause for Alice. Thank you so much.